So hello everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak at the Film, Media and Performing Arts doctoral seminars this week. I'm now just going to share my screen and open up my PowerPoint. So today I'm going to talk about collaboration and using drawing for collaboration and also for creating collaborative performances. In my professorial lecture, I focused on my own post-medium practice, how I see it as fluid, queer, and ultimately questioning and deterritorializing the very ontological basis of animation. I also talked about how we're all assemblages of ideas and other actants, a product of the communities we're part of. And today I'm going to return to that idea of community. I'm going to show different projects from that previous lecture, just apart from just one, and I'm going to focus on ideas of collaboration and participation. Now, art is often thought of as the ultimate marker of individuality, signature, and personal vision, but the artist does not and has not always made all their own work. In the Renaissance, for example, artists had apprentices and assistants who helped them complete the paintings that they were commissioned to make. And nowadays, I'm increasingly bored with the idea of single authorship, with the neoliberal and narcissistic focus that many artists have on themselves as an individual. So although I do still make projects on my own, so I'm not saying I don't make projects on my own, it's becoming an increasingly important part of my practice to be involved in collaboration with others, in building communities and social networks, in organising symposiums and exhibitions, and being part of encouraging dialogue and debate. So as I said, today I'm going to focus on drawing and how that can be used as a tool for collaboration and creating collaborative performances. This talk is also intended as a homage to Maryclare Foá, Jane Grisewood, Carali McCall, and the story of how we met as PhD students and what happened next. This talk is largely based on chapter 3 of the book, which was written between myself and Maryclare Foá, so I'm acknowledging her contribution to the ideas, as well as many conversations that we had with Jane Grisewood and Carali McCall. So as I said, I'm going to talk through examples from the book. The book was published in 2020, just 9 months ago, but we're already on the third print run, which is very exciting. And as a group, we've been collaborating since 2008. We met as PhD students, and our work is as a collective, most recently this publication, but we've also made a number of exhibitions, art projects and residencies together. And we also do our own individual work. So we don't only work as a collective, we also work individually. What we were interested in is shaking up the model of making art. Instead of the artist dictating what the work is supposed to be all about, what if you wanted to share the act of creation, to take advantage of all of the different possible interpretations that another person might bring to your work, and use this unpredictability of someone else's contribution as part of the work. One of our big inspirations is John Cage. Cage's approach to composition represented a paradigm shift in music, away from melody, harmony, and rhythm as the basics of musical experience, to an exploration of duration, sound, and silence. Cage aimed to relinquish authorial control by the composer, to open the mind of the listener and engulf them in the present moment. Cage had come to think of music not as a communication from the artist to an audience, but rather as an activity of sounds in which the artist found a way to let sounds be themselves. His work shows the influence of Zen Buddhism, on which Cage had attended lectures by the Japanese author and teacher Suzuki Roshi at Columbia University from 1949 to 1951, just a few years after the end of the Second World War. Projector, begin at 16 minutes, play freely until 23 minutes, begin again at 24:30, play freely until 35:45, begin at 38:20, play freely until 44:25. After his death, one unsigned page of Cage's score for Untitled Black Mountain Piece was discovered with these simple instructions that are on the screen written down. This very minimal set of instructions for a performance gave each artist a randomly allocated time period, and they could interpret this freely and really do what they wanted in the time space. Recollections by the collaborating artists of what actually happened at this event in 1952 are various and at times even contradictory. Some recall that Merce Cunningham was chased by a dog while dancing through the performance space, the Black Mountain College dining hall, and also dancing outside. David Tudor played the piano and a radio. Cage himself delivered a lecture from the top of the ladder, although some people say he spoke behind a lectern. Apparently he spoke on Zen Buddhism, although other witnesses have said he recited the Declaration of Independence. Robert Rauschenberg played Edith Piaf records on an old-fashioned phonograph. Tommy Jackson did impressions in ink. Nicholas Cernovich projected a film. Richards and Charles Olson climbed ladders and recited poetry. Now, this seminal work subsequently came to be known as the first happening, and it marked an important shift in fine art practice, breaking away from the traditions of a conventional theatrical performance whose shape in space and time depends on a fixed physical position and a written script, towards an embrace of flux and spontaneity, both in the composition of the instructions and the means by which those instructions may or may not be followed. Thus, the end product of these scored instructions are not prescribed. Rather, the process of individual interpretation and response to the instructions becomes the focus of the work, the chain of events, and the possibility of chance iterations. From 1958, Cage taught an influential course in experimental composition at the New School for Social Research in New York, and here's an outline of what went on there. Many artists and composers who attended Cage's course would later be identified with the Fluxus group, such as George Brecht, Lamonti Young, Alison Knowles, Dick Higgins, Alan Kaprow, George Makunius, and Toshi Ichiganagi. Students were encouraged to go beyond conventional ideas of how music is made and to think of it as events in time-space and time structures. They were encouraged to experiment sonically using toy instruments and objects such as radios. Cage's students experimented with a combination of art, performance, and musical form. One such outcome was the event score. So what is a score? A score is a piece of musical notation traditionally in which a composer describes sounds that a musician will then go on to perform. So it's instructions for a performance. Now let's look at the way Cage's students were experimenting with the idea of encoding an instruction for a performance. Lamonti Young was inspired to extend the paradigm of the composition to describe both music and other kinds of actions. His 1960s compositions were concerned with duration and repetition. In this first one here, composition 7, musical notation depicted the notes B and F sharp with the accompanying direction to be held for a long time. When we move on to see the 10th iteration of the composition, the instruction has become text only and consists of directions for an action: draw a straight line and follow it. It has a similar concern with duration, a continuity of one activity and holding at a constant level to number 7. Lamont Young's own performance of instruction number 10 involved citing with plumb lines and drawing on the floor with chalk. Now, in 1962, the experimental composer and media artist Namjoon Paik presented a free interpretation of Young's composition 1960, number 10. Since musical compositions are written for musicians to interpret, authorship in the moment of performance becomes intertwined between composer and interpreter. Although he followed Young's instructions, Paik's version, called Zen for Head, was very different from Young's earlier version, enacted with chalk. Paik dipped his own head into a bucket of ink and, using his hair as a brush, dragged his head along an extended sheet of paper to paint a line. This act referenced the traditional art of Zen calligraphy on paper scrolls, in which the careful creation of text serves as an act of meditation. However, there's an implied mockery here, both of abstract expressionism and also perhaps of the fetishism of Zen Buddhism by his fellow artists. Through his physical act of mark making to interpret Young's composition, Paik's version adds new layers to Young's original composition in a collaborative act of combined intentionality. So, Foá, Grisewood, McCall, and myself were all very interested in John Cage and event scores. As we studied together on our PhDs in UAL, we did a number of residencies together. This one at Wimbledon Centre for Drawing in 2010 was our 3rd. The other 3 group members were fine artists, accustomed to working individually and not at all comfortable with collaborating. But with my having a background in theatre and film, I finally won them over to working cooperatively with the metaphor of being in a girl band. Each retains their own identity and their own instrument, but together we create something that surprises ourselves that we never would have done alone. Inspired by our research into Fluxus artists and their use of event scores, we use this technique to create collaborative performances of drawing. The idea of the event score seemed to fit really well with text messaging and a way for us to communicate as a group while on the residency. The concept of ARC grew from a visualization of communication technology, the image of a signal beaming from its source in one location and arcing over to a receiver in another place. These short written scores would action relayed collaboration, hence we referred to them by the acronym ARC. This was Maryclare Foá's concept ARC. So it was a method for us to include artists from different locations in one collaboration during our residency, because we weren't always all present in the room at the same time. So what we would do is we'd think of different instructions and we would interact with, use these instructions to interact both with ourselves and with external international practitioners. So we'd send the message by text message, and here's some responses to this message by myself and Jane Grisewood at the time. We created a lot of different research drawings during this process that was exhibited as part of the residency. We used face-to-face, verbal and written text messaging and Skype to communicate between ourselves and our international collaborators. So this is example of one sent to Trian in Bucharest and one sent to Maya in Los Angeles. And our collaborators then made us drawings and sent them back to us, and we printed these out and put them on the walls. They also wrote instructions for us to add to our stock of different instructions that we wrote down. So the potential of a range of social media and teleconferencing technologies was explored to aid creative collaborations between different locations and time zones, such as documenting our work in progress through blogging, writing collaboratively with Google Docs, and publicizing our events through Facebook. To enable a broader and more interactive collaboration, national and international artists were invited to complete an instruction or suggest one, thus adding further variation and layering in the project. During the period of the residency, the ARCs were transmitted by handwritten or typed notes, telephone, SMS messages, email, and Skype. The mobile phone becomes a key tool to deliver ARC instructions, irrespective of locations, providing an intimate and immediate connection. This methodology of collaboration between group members and invited guests kept the work developing, alive, and full of surprises. So we created a series of these different instructions, transcribed them all onto index cards, and enacted these instructions in a live performance using graphite, white light, and sound. Multimodal in their conceptualization of mark making, the ARCs explored vision, touch, light and dark, time and duration, sound, and mapping. Some rules denoted particular durations and materials, while others were completely open to interpretation. And some of the instructions also involved audience members. The materials used to action the scores ranged from basic drawing mediums of charcoal and graphite, through sound to virtual ephemeral marks generated from digital light that weaved back and forth in interaction with the physical marks on the wall. This was created by a tag tool, an instrument for performance drawing with light linked to a projector, computer, and Wacom tablet. During the performance, these instruction cards were laid face down on the floor for the 4 performers to pick up an action at random in front of the audience. So next project, Notes on a Table. This is a series of collaborative automatic drawings we've been working on since 2010. We've been quite influenced by Georgiana Horton, another spiritualist artist, and the drawings that they made during seances, and our collaborative, spontaneous tabletop drawings somehow reference that idea of gathering around a table and psychic energy gathering between a small group of people. The drawings are the size of a table. They're large. Sometimes we create them live in a gallery as a performance, and sometimes we exhibit just the finished drawings. Here's one we did at the House of Illustration and Letheby Gallery. In this particular drawing, sound was an important part of the performance, and we had microphones picking up the sound of the drawings that we made. And some of the visitors to the gallery also joined in with the marks that we were making. Sometimes we use colour, sometimes we use just black and white. And this is another one that we did as part of a residency that I did in Folkestone, in a gallery there. And this is another couple. We've done a whole series of them. Now, as well as collaborating with Foá, Grisewood and McCall, I've also done a number of collaborations between myself and Maryclare Foá. The Trayon series was a number of works that were inspired by the myth of the first drawing. So the myth of the first drawing is from Pliny the Elder, and it is that a Corinthian maiden whose father is a potter picks up a piece of charcoal and draws on the wall around the shadow of her departing lover. And so the first drawing is about capturing loss. It's about making absence visible. It's quite a poignant story, and interesting that the first drawing was purportedly made by a woman. Excuse me. So Maryclare and I were asked to respond to this myth for an exhibition in Paris. So we traced around each other's outlines in life size. So these drawings are life size. And this act was like an attempt to hold time by fixing our shapes in place. We also made a video of us walking in a circle that I made into an animation. Here's an idea of the scale and the hanging in the show. The animation was projected over our life-size drawings. It looked as if we were trying to escape from the paper, as if the paper simply couldn't contain us. And I can show a quick drawing here so you get the idea of what it looked like with the animation projected over the drawings and our restless figures pacing back and forward across it. Okay, so this next piece, number 3, we began to think about women looking out for people to return from war, perhaps, also looking out into the future. So we made a series of drawings in different styles, consisting of a number of different forms of transport. And over the top of this, we made a video of us walking in a circle. And I'll show you the projection. And the original video that we made, we were walking up a hill, so there'd be a change in perspective. And we wanted to get the look as if we were searching. We were constantly searching across all of these different modes of transport, restlessly walking back and forward in a continual loop, searching for someone to come home. So this was for the Folkestone Triennale, and the theme was Look Out that year. So Maryclare and I are very pleased that that's going to be shown in the temporal drawing exhibition, which actually opens today at Loughborough University, curated by Susan Kamenfi, with a number of different works bringing time into the practice of drawing, and organised by the Drawing Research Network. So that opens today. Now I'm going to quickly talk about one of my own projects, which was directly inspired by working on the book with Foá, Grisewood and McCall. This project grew out of my involvement with the artists collective in Spiral London, which is a collaboration led by Charlie Fox of Counter Productions, in which a spiral line drawn around the map of London is divided into 32 different walks around the city. Walking through many parts of London you never would come across normally, because it's completely determined by chance, your route through this drawing of a line. We were invited to run a festival for Gravesham. This was a night festival inspired by Charles Dickens' Walks at Night. And as a group, we got to talking about walking at night, and actually what some group members didn't realise, that a lot of people feel very unsafe walking around at night. They don't feel free to roam around the city after dark. This could be women, but it could also be young men from certain estates who cannot walk freely in other postcodes that they don't belong to, or they'd be attacked from gangs from that area. So with this piece, I wanted us to reclaim the night, to come together as a group and scare away all of our fears with noise and light and communal activities. The walk that this was part of involved going past light industrial areas, walking over caged walkways with sheer drops to a chalk pit underneath, through bushes and undergrowth, past burnt out motorbikes, across a caged walkway, going across a railway line, finally ending up in a disused chalk pit near Ebbsfleet International Station at 11:30 at night. We handed out laser pens to participants on the walk. And then I gave people instructions to follow. We created a live performance of visual music with the participation of whoever has come on the walk. And this is very much an experience. It's not a durational image for photographs. It's very much a live experience. People followed my instructions. They used different colors, different types of mark making. And the mark making types that I use is inspired by my research into Laban dance choreography. So the mark making is taken from Laban dance principles. So we used, as I said, different colors, different shapes. I got people divided into groups, got them to use different colors and different marks in their groups, and also to sing in rounds. The instructions that I follow when I'm giving the instructions are loosely based on a score that I made by walking on musical paper using the 3 colors of the laser pointers. Just gonna quickly just have a little clip of this so you can hear the sound. Just so you get a sense of the singing and the choral activity. This is a participatory activity. So you can see how this project has actually grown out of my interest in experimental animation and performance drawing. And when it's performed live, the animation looks like an animation made by scratching onto film, such as that made by Len Lai. And I'm grateful for Martina Trithart for talking about this project yesterday as part of a panel about women artists working with animation in public space at the Zagreb Scanner Symposium. So thanks, Martina. So in conclusion, I've shown you how a collaboration between 4 PhD students grew, developed, and ended up as a book. And I wanted to say that for me, a PhD should be about much more than a piece of writing or a piece of practice. It should also be about developing an ongoing inquiry, but most importantly, a sustainable and supportive network that you can go on to collaborate with, grow, develop in your future career after leaving. And I'd say the ability to collaborate is actually a type of literacy. There's a lot wrong with the world today, but we are not helpless. We need to stop gazing inwards. We need to acknowledge how intimately interconnected with the planet and other humans we are, join together with others and form a movement for change. So thank you very much for your attention. Let me know if you've got any questions now. I've got my email here. I don't go on Twitter much, but you can follow my updates on Instagram. I'm also on WeChat. I have a blog where I write about animation and in particular expanded animation. And there's also an archive of my works on my website. Thank you very much.